The air in the small town felt warm and heavy that afternoon, carrying with it the faint smell of fried yam and palm oil from the nearby market. The streets were quiet, but in the house at the far end of the lane, there was noise, the kind of noise that comes not from joy but from restless energy. In the middle of the living room sat Chima, a young man not yet 30, dressed in clothes that looked more expensive than they should for a small town. His phone was in his hand, flashing images of laughter, music, and drinks. Outside the window, the sun was dipping toward the horizon, but Chima barely noticed. His father, Namdi, sat in a worn chair, watching him quietly. The house smelled faintly of old wood and cooking stew. Namdi had worked his whole life to build that home. He had used sweat, years of struggle, and a stubborn heart to make sure his family had something to call their own. But his son had never shown much care for it. Chima laughed suddenly, tossing his phone aside. He grabbed a small bag of cash he had hidden under the bed, stuffing it into his pocket. He didn't bother telling his father where he was going. To him, it was simple. Tonight there would be music, lights, and girls, something worth more than the house he was sitting in. His mind raced with dreams of endless parties, excitement, and freedom. The next morning, the town woke up to whispers. Word spread quickly that Namdi's house had been sold overnight. No meeting, no discussion, just gone. The buyer was a man from another city. Some said the deal had been made in haste, with promises and checks. Others said it was all done while Namdi was away. When Namdi returned home, he found the walls of his house already under new ownership. His heart sank. Chima, on the other hand, was miles away, in a city lit by neon lights. He had booked a small guest house with money that was not his own to spend freely. That night, he danced without thought. Girls laughed at his jokes, bottles clinked, music pounded, and his laughter drowned the voices that might have told him this was wrong. But somewhere deep inside, a faint unease was growing. By dawn, the music faded and so did the laughter. Chima woke to silence, his phone showing hundreds of missed calls. His bag of cash was almost empty. When he checked the phone, he saw messages from friends, strangers, and one that chilled him. "Did you really sell your father's house?" That was the first seed of doubt. Chima woke up late in the morning, his head pounding from the noise of the night before. The room was dim, curtains half drawn, with a stale smell of spilled drinks and sweat hanging in the air. The girls who had been around him just hours earlier were gone. The bed was messy, the floor littered with bottles and empty wrappers. For a moment, he lay still, trying to push away the sharp sting behind his eyes. Then it came back to him like a wave crashing against stone. He had sold his father's house. The thought flickered across his mind, and he pushed it away quickly. "It doesn't matter," he whispered to himself, forcing a smile. "I'll make it back. Money comes, money goes. What matters is the life I'm living now." He stretched, pulled out his phone, and began scrolling. Messages poured in, some filled with disbelief, others with mocking laughter. "How could you do that?" one said. "You sold the only roof your father had," another read. He clenched his jaw, trying to ignore them. His pride wouldn't let him feel shame, not yet. He typed a reply to one of his friends. "Don't worry. You'll see me riding big soon. This is just the beginning." But back in the town, the scene was nothing like his prideful fantasy. His father stood outside the house with a small bag of belongings, his clothes folded neatly inside. The new owner's men had already begun removing furniture. Neighbors gathered in small groups, whispering. Some shook their heads, pity in their eyes. Others muttered under their breath, condemning Chima for what he had done. Namdi tried to stand tall, but his shoulders sagged, his eyes heavy with hurt. "Papa, where will you stay?" a neighbor asked quietly. Namdi didn't answer. He simply walked away, his cane tapping gently against the ground as he made his way to his late brother's compound at the edge of the village. Every step felt like a wound. He had promised his wife before she passed that their home would stand for their children. Now it was gone, not by poverty, not by misfortune, but by the hand of his own son. Chima, far away, spent the next few days lost in a blur of laughter and music. He surrounded himself with girls who liked the way he threw money around. He ordered drinks for everyone, made promises of trips, clothes, and good times. His name became popular in small circles of the city nightlife. People called him the rich boy, though the money in his bag grew thinner each day. But the night always ends, and with it came reality. One evening, as the music boomed and his voice cracked from shouting, Chima reached into his pocket and realized the wad of cash had shrunk to almost nothing. A chill ran through him. He excused himself from the dance floor, stepped outside, and counted the few notes left. His heart raced. He thought of the house, the money gone, and the fact that he had nothing to fall back on. Still, pride is a dangerous companion. He told himself, "No problem. I'll call some friends. We'll double it. Something will work out." But his calls went unanswered. The same friends who cheered him when he spent freely now ignored him. The girls who laughed at his jokes moved on to others with deeper pockets. In the city, nothing tied anyone to loyalty. Meanwhile, in the village, life moved on but scars remained. Namdi spent his days quietly, his voice reduced to whispers. He avoided gatherings because whispers about his son always found a way to circle back to him. He would sit alone under the shade of a mango tree, staring at the road as if expecting Chima to appear, to kneel and beg forgiveness. But days turned to weeks, and the road remained empty. One evening, Namdi received a visitor, an old friend who had known Chima since childhood. The man sat beside him and said softly, "Namdi, forgive me for saying this, but your son's pride will not end well. The city is not forgiving. If he continues, he may lose more than just money." Namdi's eyes grew wet, but he stayed silent. Deep down, he feared the same. Back in the city, Chima faced the hardest night yet. His room had not been paid for, and the owner demanded money. With only a few notes left, he begged for more time. The man laughed, saying, "You came here acting like a prince, but princes don't run out of gold. Tomorrow morning, if you don't pay, you leave." That night, Chima lay awake, his mind running in circles. For the first time, he thought of his father, not with affection, but with dread. He imagined his father's face, the hurt in his eyes, and he quickly turned away from the thought. Pride still held him, even as the world around him began to crumble. The sun rose, and with it came humiliation. His things were thrown out of the room. Clothes scattered on the ground, his phone nearly broken as it hit the pavement. People gathered to watch. Whispers filled the air, the same kind of whispers that had followed his father in the village. Chima picked up his things, his hands trembling. He no longer felt like the rich boy of the city. He felt small, exposed, unwanted. Yet somewhere inside, the fire of denial still burned. "I'll rise again," he muttered to himself. "I'll prove them all wrong." But as he walked away, dragging his bag along the road, he could not escape the truth. The money was gone. The house was gone. And the people he thought were friends had vanished with the night. The city's noise swallowed him, but in his heart, a silence had begun, the kind of silence that follows when life begins to teach the hardest lessons. Chima walked through the streets of the city with his bag dragging behind him, each step heavier than the last. The sounds around him, the shouting of street hawkers, the honk of car horns, the laughter from small roadside bars, felt distant, almost unreal. He was numb. Not because of the noise, but because of what he had lost. The night before replayed in his mind over and over. The laughter that once surrounded him now sounded cruel. The girls who had smiled at him were gone. Even the music that had filled his room felt like mockery. For the first time, Chima understood how it felt to be empty, to have nothing, not money, not respect, not even a place to sleep. He wandered aimlessly until he found himself in a quiet part of town. The shops here were smaller, the streets narrower. Old men sat in wooden chairs outside their stalls, smoking and talking softly. Children played barefoot on the pavement, chasing a deflated ball. Somewhere, a woman was singing softly, her voice carrying like a memory. Chima stopped. He didn't know why, but something about the sound pulled him in. He found a small bench under a dim streetlight and sat down, resting his head in his hands. His bag, heavy with clothes and a few belongings, leaned against his legs. He remembered his father's voice from years before, telling him, "A man's home is not just walls and roof. It is where his heart rests." Back then, Chima had laughed. Now, he felt the weight of those words pressing deep inside him. As night gave way to morning, Chima realized he had nowhere to go. The guest house owner had thrown him out. The money in his pocket was almost gone. The pride that had driven him was now mixed with fear. He tried to call his friends. He tried to borrow money. Every call ended in silence or rejection. They had enjoyed the excitement when he had cash, but now that it was gone, they disappeared as quickly as they had come. It was a lonely realization, but it was also a truth he had to face. Chima wandered for days. He slept in bus stations, under bridges, and on benches. Food came from small street stalls or the kindness of strangers. He began to notice things he had never cared about before: the quiet kindness of a shopkeeper who gave him bread without asking, the smiles of children who didn't know his shame, the patience of an old woman who let him sit near her stall without asking him to pay. But even those small acts of kindness could not erase the anger that churned inside him. Not at the world, not entirely, but at himself. He remembered the house in the village, the sweat in his father's eyes, and the trust he had thrown away without thinking. That anger burned quietly, deep inside him. One afternoon, as Chima sat near a small market square, he overheard a conversation. Two men were talking about a man who had sold his father's house. They spoke with disbelief, shaking their heads. Chima's ears burned. He recognized the story. He wanted to turn away, to disappear, but the words stayed with him. That night, he found himself sitting alone on the edge of a river. The water reflected the moonlight, gentle and steady. He stared at it for hours, thinking about how quickly everything had changed. The house, the money, his friends, they were gone. What remained was him and a deep, aching emptiness. Somewhere in that emptiness, a decision began to form. He could keep running, chasing temporary thrills until there was nothing left of him. Or he could go back. Back to the village. Back to his father. Back to face the consequences of what he had done. The next morning, Chima boarded a bus heading toward home. The road stretched long before him, the sun rising and burning away the shadows of the night. He sat quietly, his bag resting at his feet, watching the world pass by. Every mile brought him closer to the truth he had been avoiding. When he arrived at the village, the air felt different. It was quieter here, softer somehow, carrying the smell of earth and cooking fires. The road was dusty, and the houses looked smaller than he remembered. People stopped and stared at him as he walked. He saw whispers, heard murmurs. The story had reached everyone. His shame was no longer his alone, it belonged to the whole village. Namdi sat under the mango tree, the same place he had gone each day since losing the house. His back was bent, his eyes distant. Chima stopped without thinking. He stood there, unable to speak, his chest tight with guilt. For a long moment, the two of them said nothing. Finally, Namdi spoke. His voice was soft but steady. "You are here." Chima nodded. I came back." Namdi looked at him without anger, but there was a sadness deeper than any word. "Why?" he asked simply. Chima swallowed hard, his throat tight. "Because I have nowhere else to go. And because I need to. I need to say I'm sorry." The words felt strange coming out of his mouth, heavy and real. Namdi studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Sitting here will not change what is done. But it can change what is next." Chima sat beside his father, and the silence between them was not empty. It was heavy with history, mistakes, and the first fragile step toward something like forgiveness. But neither of them knew the path ahead. The village watched quietly as the two sat together under the fading light. And somewhere, deep inside Chima, a new story was beginning. Chima stayed with his father under the mango tree long after the sun had gone down. The air grew cooler, and crickets began their nightly song. Around them, the village seemed to breathe softly, as though aware that something important was happening. No one approached. People passed quietly, looking with curious eyes, but they said nothing. Namdi broke the silence first. When I built that house, I did not build it for myself. I built it for my children. I thought they would live in it with respect for what came before them. I never thought I would see it gone, not by rust, not by flood, not by war, but by my own son. Chima's chest tightened. He wanted to speak, to explain, but the words caught in his throat. Guilt felt heavy now, far heavier than shame. Shame fades with time, but guilt burrows deep. I thought I was living my dream, Chima said finally. His voice was low. I thought I could make my own life. I didn't think about you. I didn't think about the house. I just thought about myself. Namdi didn't reply. He just stared at the dark road ahead. Chima wondered if his father was even listening, but he kept talking anyway. I have been sleeping in places I never thought I would sleep. I have been hungry. I have been laughed at. I have been forgotten. And now I understand what I threw away. I thought money would make me free, but it made me a prisoner of my own pride. The words felt foreign to him as he said them. Pride had once been his armor, but now it felt like a chain. Namdi finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. Pride can make a man climb mountains, but it can also make him fall from them. What matters now is what you do with what is left. Chima looked at his father, searching for forgiveness, but found only a quiet sadness. He did not know what to say. The air between them carried the weight of years, of broken trust, and of things neither of them could change. That night, Chima slept under the open sky. He had no house to return to, no room filled with furniture or warmth. Above him, the stars shone in a way he had never noticed before. They felt distant, yet steady, silent witnesses to his failure. The days that followed were hard. Chima tried to work in the village, asking for small jobs, carrying water, helping in the fields, repairing fences. People looked at him differently now. Some whispered, others ignored him. But there were a few who nodded at him, offering small smiles. Those gestures, small as they were, felt like sparks of hope. Namdi watched silently. He never told Chima to stop working. He never scolded him again. Instead, he let his son carry his own burden. But sometimes, at night, he would sit quietly, listening to Chima's soft sighs and the sound of him returning from the fields. One afternoon, Chima sat by the river, washing clothes for an old woman in the village. Her house was small and worn, and her smile was gentle. "You remind me of my own son," she said softly as she handed him a bowl of food. "He left the village many years ago. He never came back." Chima swallowed hard. He did not answer. He only nodded, feeling a strange connection to her words. The days turned into weeks. Slowly, Chima began to rebuild himself, not with money, but with work, humility, and quiet determination. But the wound between him and his father remained. It was not something that could be fixed with words alone. Trust, once broken, takes a long time to heal. One evening, Namdi called Chima to sit with him under the mango tree. The air was thick with the scent of drying earth after rain. Namdi's eyes looked tired, but there was a softness to his voice. "You have returned," he said simply. "I have to," Chima replied. "I don't want to be a man who runs away from his mistakes." Namdi nodded slowly. "Mistakes are part of life. But it is what you do after that matters more." Chima stayed silent, feeling the truth of his father's words deep in his bones. In the days that followed, Chima began speaking to villagers. He apologized openly for what he had done. Some ignored him. Others nodded and listened. A few came forward to offer small work. Slowly, the hard knot of shame began to loosen. But there was still one thing left, something Chima could not yet face. The house his father had lost was gone forever. The weight of that loss was a shadow that lingered over every step he took. And deep inside, Chima knew that no apology would ever bring it back. One afternoon, Chima approached his father again under the mango tree. "Papa," he said quietly, "I want to rebuild, not the house, but something worth more. I want to rebuild your trust." Namdi looked at him long and hard. There was no answer right away. Then, with a faint nod, he said, "You will need to prove it." Chima understood. He had no more pride left. Only resolve. And so, in the village that had watched his fall, Chima began the hardest part of his journey. A journey not for wealth, not for power, not for pride, but for forgiveness. The path ahead was unclear, but for the first time, Chima felt he was walking it in the right direction. The villagers watched silently. Some doubted him. Others hoped for him. But no one could predict if he would ever make it. And somewhere, deep in Chima's heart, a storm was beginning to form. One that would either break him completely or rebuild him into something stronger than before. The weeks after Chima's promise under the mango tree stretched into months. Each day he woke before dawn, his body aching from work that seemed endless. The villagers had given him small jobs, carrying water from the river, helping repair fences, clearing weeds from farm plots, and each time, Chima worked without complaint. His hands grew rough, his skin darkened under the sun, and his back bent with labor. Some mornings, he woke with pain so sharp it made him question whether he could go on. But he reminded himself of the words his father had spoken, "It is what you do after a mistake that matters most." That became his quiet mantra, his hidden strength, even when he felt weary. The village began to watch him differently. At first, they were skeptical. A man who had sold his father's house for nothing was not someone they could trust quickly. They whispered. They pointed. They recalled the story to visitors as a caution. But over time, Chima's quiet determination began to shift their gaze. He no longer demanded recognition. He did not plead for forgiveness. He only worked. One afternoon, as Chima was repairing a small fence for an old couple, a group of young boys came running toward him. They stopped, panting, watching him with curiosity. "Chima," one of them called, his voice half laughter, half surprise. "Why are you working so much?" Chima looked up and smiled faintly. "Because I have to," he said. "And because I want to." The boys laughed, but there was no mockery in it. They scattered into the street, leaving Chima with the scent of dry earth and grass clinging to his clothes. At home, Namdi watched from under the mango tree. He said nothing, but his eyes followed Chima's every move. Sometimes he would call him over, quietly asking about his day. Other times, he would simply watch in silence. It was a form of acknowledgement, though Namdi never gave praise outright. Chima also began to speak with the villagers. He went from house to house, apologizing where he could. Some accepted his apology, offering him food or small coins. Others turned away without a word. But Chima never stopped. He learned to swallow his pride. The village became both his trial and his teacher. One evening, as the sun was fading into a red glow, Chima sat by the river alone. He had been thinking about his father and the weight of what he had done. The river moved slowly, carrying leaves and shadows along with it. Chima watched them drift, and he realized he had been drifting too, without purpose, without direction, until now. That night, Chima found himself unable to sleep. He sat under the mango tree where his father rested and finally spoke. "Papa, I feel like I am working, but I do not know if it is enough. I want to prove to you that I am not the same boy who sold your house. But how do I prove it when the pain is so heavy?" Namdi looked at him with eyes that seemed to measure his soul. "The proof is not in grand acts. It is in the patience of your actions. You have begun. That is more than most can say." Chima wanted to argue, to demand a sign that he was forgiven, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he sat in silence, the sound of the crickets filling the space between them. The weeks that followed brought a new challenge. A dry spell had struck the village, and crops began to wilt. Water became scarce. The villagers grew anxious, worried about food and survival. In this time of hardship, Chima stepped forward. He woke before everyone to carry water from the river. He organized groups to help dig deeper wells. He worked without rest, even when his own body begged him to stop. People began to notice. Some still doubted him, but others began to talk quietly among themselves. "He is trying," they said. "He is working harder than any of us." For the first time, Chima began to feel a flicker of something he had not felt in years: respect. But more than that, he felt a growing connection to the people around him. They were no longer strangers. They were part of his life, part of his journey. One afternoon, Namdi called Chima under the mango tree. His voice was quiet but firm. "You are working hard. But there is something missing." Chima looked at him. "What is it, Papa?" "Forgiveness is not given lightly. It must be earned. You have begun, but you must do more. You must show the village that you will not betray trust again. You must build something worth more than the house you sold." Chima nodded. He felt a deep stirring inside him. Namdi's words were not just about the past, they were about the future. The next morning, Chima walked through the village with a purpose he had not felt before. He began speaking to elders, sharing ideas for improving the village's water supply, repairing homes, and creating small gardens for families who could not afford food. Slowly, a plan began to form in his mind, something bigger than himself. But there was resistance. Some villagers still whispered that he could not be trusted. Some ignored him entirely. That did not stop Chima. Every day, he worked harder. Every day, he spoke to more people. Every day, he tried to prove that he had changed. One evening, as he returned from the river with water for a family, he saw Namdi waiting under the mango tree. His father's face was unreadable. "You are walking a hard path," Namdi said softly. Chima nodded. "I have to. Not for me, but for you, for the village, and for myself." Namdi looked at him for a long moment. "You have begun to build something. But building is not enough. You must protect it. And that will test you in ways you cannot yet imagine." Chima stared at his father, the weight of the words settling over him. Somewhere deep inside, he knew the hardest trials were still ahead. The village watched quietly as Chima returned to his work. Some now believed in him. Others still doubted. But all knew one thing: Chima's journey was far from over. And deep inside him, something burned brighter than shame or guilt, the desire to prove that he could be the man his father once hoped he would become. The dry season dragged on. Days became hotter, nights became longer, and the air in the village seemed heavier with worry. The river, once a ribbon of life winding through the land, had shrunk to a thin stream. The earth cracked under the relentless sun, and the smell of dust clung to every breath. Chima woke each morning with the same thought, that he could not fail now. Not after the promise he had made to his father, not after the work he had done to prove himself. But even he could not have guessed the trial that would come. One morning, as the village gathered at the central square, the elders called an urgent meeting. A trader from a distant town had arrived, offering a deal. He would provide water to the village for a price far greater than they could afford. Many villagers were desperate. Some argued that it was the only way to survive. Others said it was a trap. The meeting turned into heated voices, angry words, and fear that spread like wildfire. Chima stood quietly at the edge of the gathering, listening. His heart beat faster. This was his moment, not to speak of himself, but to act for the village he now felt bound to protect. When silence fell, he stepped forward. "We cannot give our future to a stranger," he said firmly. "We can find another way. Let us dig deeper wells. Let us share the water we have. Let us work together." Some looked at him as if he were speaking nonsense. Others listened with a strange curiosity. An elder, who had always been skeptical of Chima, stepped forward. "And you think this can be done? When the earth is cracked and the river is dying?" Chima met his gaze. I do not know. But I know this: if we do nothing, we will lose everything. If we stand together, there is still hope. The elder fell silent. The crowd murmured. A debate began, louder and more tense than anything before. Voices rose, calling out promises and doubts. Chima stayed in the center, listening and speaking when the moment came, offering ideas, urging calm, reminding the people that they were stronger together. By the end of the meeting, no decision had been made. But something had shifted. Chima's words, carried with sincerity and a voice hardened by work, had planted a seed. The next days became a test of will. Chima organized small groups to dig new wells, carrying buckets of water under the blazing sun. He spoke to the elders and the youth alike, gathering support. Many doubted him still. Some even whispered that his heart was not truly in the village's good, that he still sought only redemption for himself. But Chima never stopped. One afternoon, while working near the old dry riverbed, Chima collapsed from exhaustion. Villagers rushed to his side. Namdi came running, his face lined with worry. He lifted his son gently to his feet. You pushed too hard, he said quietly. Even the earth cannot be hurried. Chima shook his head. I have to, Papa. I have to prove it is not just words. Namdi looked at him long and did not answer. He only carried him home. That night, Chima lay under the same mango tree where he had spoken to his father before. He stared at the dark sky, the stars faint in the heat of the dry season. His body ached. His mind was heavy with doubt. Still, he could not stop thinking about what must be done. The next morning, he went to the village square. The trader was still there, waiting for a decision. The elders gathered again. The air was thick with tension. Chima stepped forward once more. We will dig the well ourselves, he said. If we all give what we can, time, energy, whatever we have, we can do it. A murmur rose among the crowd. Some scoffed, saying it was impossible. Others nodded quietly, unsure but willing to try. Chima did not argue. He only said, let us begin. The village rose as one. Some brought shovels. Others brought buckets. Even those who doubted came to help, pulled by curiosity and the determination in Chima's voice. 4 days they worked together. Chima led them under the scorching sun, carrying water, digging deeper, encouraging those who grew weary. His body ached, but his spirit burned brighter. Namdi watched silently from the edge of the worksite. He saw the change in his son, a change deeper than words could describe. Chima was no longer the boy who had sold a house for parties. He was a man willing to carry burdens greater than his own pride. Then, one evening, after weeks of work, water broke through the earth. A faint trickle at first, then a steady flow. The villagers gathered around, shouting with joy, lifting each other in triumph. The dry earth drank deep, and the air seemed lighter. Chima stood back, watching the scene with tears in his eyes. He felt something shift inside him. Not just pride, but a deep sense of belonging. The village had given him a chance to prove himself, and he had taken it. That night, under the mango tree, Namdi spoke. You have built more than a well. You have built trust. But remember, Chima, trust is not built in days. It is tested in storms. Chima nodded. I understand, Papa. And I am ready for the storms. Namdi's eyes softened. Then you may yet become the man I hoped for. The village slept under a sky that seemed softer that night. The sound of flowing water echoed through the air. But deep inside, Chima knew this was only the beginning. There were storms still ahead. And the greatest storm was yet to come, one that would test not just his resolve, but the fragile peace he had begun to rebuild. The next morning, Chima stood at the edge of the village, looking toward the road that led away from home. Somewhere down that path lay the trial that would decide everything. And he knew, without doubt, that he could not turn back. The morning after the well finally began to flow was different. The village woke to the sound of water running deep under the earth, and it brought a quiet sense of relief, almost a kind of peace. For the first time in months, people moved about without the heavy worry that had clung to them. But Chima felt no rest in his heart. The moment was fragile, like glass. He knew storms still came, and this was not the end of his test. Something deeper waited for him, something that would demand everything he had become. It began with a stranger arriving at the edge of the village. He was dressed simply, but there was an air about him that made people stop and stare. Word spread quickly. He was a buyer for land, offering more than the house Chima had once sold. The stranger came directly to the elders, speaking with a calm but persuasive voice. His offer was tempting. The money was enough to change lives. Enough to give the village tools, schools, and medicine. But the price was high. The stranger wanted ownership of not just land, but part of the village's heart. The elders called a meeting. The air was tense. Some saw this as salvation, others as a curse. Chima listened quietly at first. He had learned over the months to speak with care. But inside him, something stirred, a warning he could not ignore. When the elders looked to speak, he stepped forward. His voice was steady, even as his heart raced. "This is not just about money," he said. "This is about who we are. We have fought to survive. We have built trust. We have earned our water, our home. If we give this away, we lose more than land. We lose ourselves." The crowd murmured, some nodding, others shaking their heads. One elder, the same who had once doubted him, spoke sharply. "Chima, this is not about pride. This is about survival. Do you not see the chance before us?" Chima met his gaze. Survival is not only living, it is living with dignity. We can survive without selling ourselves. Arguments rose and fell. Voices became heated. The stranger watched silently, waiting. Chima knew that no words would decide this. Action would. That night, Chima could not sleep. He walked through the village in silence, watching families light fires for cooking, listening to the laughter of children despite the hard season, hearing the whispers of doubt and hope. He thought of his father, of the house he had sold, of the shame that had haunted him. And he thought of the promise he had made under the mango tree, to prove he could be better. The next morning, Chima gathered a group of villagers. They went together to the well, carrying buckets and tools. He spoke softly, but with force. "We built this well together. Let us build the future together. No stranger can give us what we can give ourselves." They began to dig again, to expand the well, to strengthen the water source. Chima worked harder than ever, carrying stone, shifting earth, calling on everyone to join. Some still doubted him. Some still feared the future. But a growing number began to follow, pulled by his determination. Days turned into weeks. The stranger returned, more insistent. He offered more money, promised prosperity. But Chima stood firm. He spoke to every household, telling them of the work they had done, of the trust they had built. He reminded them that wealth without freedom was nothing. Finally, a meeting was called. The whole village gathered, the air thick with tension. Chima stood before them, exhausted but resolute. His voice rang clear. "This is the moment we decide what kind of people we are. We can sell our future for comfort today, or we can build a future together. I choose to build." There was silence. Then, one by one, villagers spoke. Some with agreement, some with doubt. But when the final voice spoke, the decision was clear: the stranger would leave. The village would keep their land, their home, and their trust. That evening, the village gathered near the well. They lit fires, sang quietly, and shared food. The air was heavy with relief and pride. Chima stood apart, watching. His body ached from weeks of labor, but inside him, something had shifted. His father came to stand beside him. "You have done more than work, Chima. You have proven your heart." Chima looked at him, the weight of his father's words sinking deep. "I still have much to prove, Papa." Namdi smiled faintly. "Perhaps. But you have proven what matters most. That a man can change. The village slept that night under a blanket of stars, the sound of flowing water soft in the distance. Chima stood alone by the well, feeling its life pulsing beneath his hands. He thought of the road ahead, knowing that life would bring new trials, but he was ready. For the first time, Chima understood that redemption was not a single act. It was a journey without end. And in that moment, he knew he was no longer the boy who had sold his father's house. He was a man who had rebuilt not only a home, but a heart. The story of Chima would live on in the village, not as the story of a mistake, but as the story of change. And change, he realized, was the most powerful thing a man could give. This story of Chima is more than just a tale, it's a reminder that no matter how far we fall, there's always a path back if we choose courage, responsibility, and love for those who matter most. Every choice we make shapes the story of who we are, and sometimes, the hardest trials lead to the greatest change. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful tales that will move your heart and stir your mind. Tell us in the comments which country you're watching from and what your local time is right now. We want to connect with every one of you around the world. Your voice matters in this journey.